The wind screamed down the main street of Dry Creek, pushing dust and tumbleweeds through the hollow shells of what once might have been a hopeful town. Boards hung loose on shuttered windows, and the saloon's swinging doors creaked as if groaning in protest. There was no laughter here, no warmth, just the sound of boots scuffing dirt, of judgment whispered behind calloused hands, and the echo of something good that had long ago died. She stumbled into view just as the bell above the blacksmith's shop struck 9. Clara Holden, the widow with the hollow eyes and bruised cheek, passed silently by the stares of men who once flirted with her and now turned their backs as if she carried pestilence. Her dress hung in tatters, mud splashed across the hem, and a deep purple mark marred the side of her face. Still, she walked upright, chin lifted slightly, as if dignity were something she could will into existence even as it was stripped from her day by day. A boy threw a stone. It clipped her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. Just kept walking, the brittle leather of her boots cracking with every step. "She's cursed," someone muttered from a porch. "She brought the fever," another hissed. "Killed her own child with it." It wasn't true. None of it was. But truth had long ceased to matter in Dry Creek. Clara had arrived 2 years ago with her husband's pension and her infant son, both barely enough to survive on. When the boy caught fever that winter and passed in the night, the town decided she was the common thread between death and misfortune, that she had brought something evil with her. Her house had been burned down, accidentally, last spring. The doctor refused to treat her. The preacher avoided her shadow. She was a ghost that hadn't yet died. On this particular morning, her body couldn't take much more. Her knees gave way beside the hitching post outside the general store, and she crumpled like a broken reed, pressing her hands into the cold ground to keep from collapsing completely. Laughter rang out. Not joyful, but cruel. Then silence. A pair of boots stepped into view. Fine leather, dusted with trail dirt, worn but well made. Clara didn't lift her head. She had learned better. Another hand, probably, waiting to strike her down or shove her into the street like they did yesterday. Or the day before. But the boots didn't move. No hand reached out. Just stillness. Then a voice. Low, rough as gravel smoothed by time. "Get up if you can." Not unkind. Not pitying. Just a statement. Like a challenge that didn't mock. She raised her eyes, blinking away the sting of dust and shame. A man stood over her. Tall, with shoulders broad beneath a worn duster. His hat shadowing eyes that seemed to watch everything and give nothing back. He didn't reach for her. Didn't offer a hand. But something in his stance suggested that if she didn't get up, he might just make the whole town kneel instead. Clara rose, her legs trembling, and brushed dirt from her skirt with fingers trembling from hunger and cold. The man nodded once, and then he turned and walked away without another word, his boots crunching in the gravel as he mounted a black horse tied nearby. He didn't look back. Elias Boone had never been one for towns. He came into Dry Creek once a month, always alone, always quiet. Folks said he owned land farther than the eye could see, that he ran cattle and horses with only the help of the wind. Some said he was rich. Others said he was dangerous. No one knew for certain because no one asked. In a place like Dry Creek, mystery earned more respect than truth. But on this day, Elias rode out slower than usual. His mind kept turning back to the woman on her knees. The way she didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't curse the heavens or plead with the crowd. She simply endured. That kind of strength, he hadn't seen it since. No. He wouldn't think of that. Elias spurred his horse into a gallop and let the wilderness swallow the town behind him. By the riverbank, Clara knelt to rinse blood from her cracked knuckles. She didn't know why she fought anymore. Not really. There was no one left to fight for. But something in her refused to lay down and die for a town that had never given her anything but pain. As she washed, a shadow fell over the water beside her. She turned fast, fear lashing through her like a whip. It was the man again. Elias Boone. Off his horse now. Standing just outside arm's reach with a battered canteen in his hand. He said nothing. Just held it out. Clara stared at him, suspicion flickering across her face. No one helped without reason. Especially not men. Especially not in Dry Creek. Still, her throat ached with dryness, and the water beside her wasn't clean. She took the canteen, drank, handed it back. Their eyes met for just a breath. Something wordless passed between them. A question neither of them was brave enough to ask. A kind of recognition. Pain knows its own. Then, Elias turned and walked back to his horse. Rode off again without explanation. That night, Clara dreamed she was a deer surrounded by wolves, teeth snapping, yellow eyes gleaming in the dark. But before they could leap, one of them stopped, turned, and instead of attacking, stood beside her. Silent. Watchful. The next 3 days passed without incident. Clara kept to the edges of town. Slept in an abandoned lean-to behind the old schoolhouse. Ate what she could find. Talked to no one. But every night she looked out toward the hills. Toward the distant line where land met sky. Then, one morning, the sound of wheels creaked through the silence. She squinted against the sun. A mule cart approached from the northern trail. Elias sat at the reins. He didn't speak when he stopped. Just looked at her. Then looked at the empty space beside him. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a rescue. It was a choice. Clara stared at him. Then at the cart. The town behind her was death. The man before her, a question. She stepped up and climbed aboard. They didn't speak for hours. The land rolled out in silence, painted gold by the rising sun, broken only by shadows of vultures gliding overhead. Wind tugged at her hair. The mule's hooves beat a rhythm against the packed earth. Somewhere near dusk, thunder rumbled in the distance. Elias glanced at the sky. Dark clouds churned behind them. "We won't make it to the ranch before night," he muttered. Clara looked ahead. A narrow pass lay just beyond a grove of twisted pines. "Floods," she said quietly. "That gully won't hold in a storm." He nodded, impressed she knew. By the time they reached it, rain had started falling in heavy sheets. The cart wheels slipped in the mud. The mule brayed. Suddenly, the edge of the trail gave way. Elias jumped down to hold the cart steady, but the rear wheel slid toward the drop. Without thinking, Clara leapt from the seat and grabbed the reins, shouting and pulling with every ounce of strength left in her thin frame. Together, they fought the storm. Mud splashed their faces. The mule screamed. The cart teetered. And then settled. They stood, panting, soaked to the bone. Eyes meeting again in the quiet aftermath. Elias broke the silence with a small nod of respect. Clara's hands trembled, but not from fear this time. That night they found shelter beneath a cliff. Built a fire with wet wood and determination. He gave her the dry side of his coat. She didn't refuse it. When she finally lay down, she whispered, "Why me?" Elias stared into the fire for a long time before replying. "Because you didn't break." She closed her eyes. The storm passed. Morning came, and with it the sound of birdsong. As they rode into the valley, the ranch revealed itself like a secret whispered by the earth, vast, quiet, untouched by hate. Clara didn't know what lay ahead. But for the first time in years, she didn't dread the future. And Elias, riding beside her, said nothing at all. But he didn't need to. Not anymore. The valley greeted Clara like a forgotten lullaby, soft and raw with memory. Towering pines framed wide fields of waist-high grass, swaying in slow rhythm with the wind. A river curved like silver thread through the land, calm and steady. And beyond it all, perched against the horizon, stood a sprawling ranch house, weathered but proud, its dark timber bones holding up against time and solitude. Elias reined in the mule cart just outside the main barn. The animals stirred restlessly, their hooves squelching in the wet ground. Clara stepped down without needing to be told. Her boots sank into mud, and the sharp scent of pine needles mixed with the faint smoke drifting from the chimney. A ranch hand emerged from the barn's shadow, a tall, gaunt man with sunburnt skin and eyes like cold iron. He looked at Clara, then back at Elias. Said nothing. Elias only nodded once, slow and deliberate. The message was clear. Clara didn't speak either. She followed Elias into the house. Inside, it was warm in the way silence can be warm. No clutter. No unnecessary adornment. Just carved beams, a stone hearth with steady flames, and the kind of clean, hard-earned order that revealed more about a man than words ever could. "You'll sleep in the east room," Elias said, finally breaking the stillness. "Food's in the cellar. If you need something, find me or Matthew." She gave a small nod. Still unused to kindness without a price. But Elias was already gone, the echo of his boots fading into the hall. The room was sparse, a bed, a table, a quilt worn soft by time. She sat down and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. That night, she ate stew by the fire with Elias sitting nearby, a book open but unread in his lap. The silence between them was not awkward, but a kind of agreement. Two souls shaped by hardship, not needing to fill the space with what they couldn't yet say. In the days that followed, Clara rose with the sun. She swept the porch, mended the tack room's broken hinges, tended to the hens. She didn't ask permission. Work was something she understood. It gave her structure, purpose. And in the quiet labor, her body began to remember strength. Her spirit, breath. She noticed things. The way Elias spoke softly to the horses, his hand steady on the wildest stallion's neck. The way he walked the perimeter at dusk, eyes scanning the tree line as if listening for a danger he couldn't name. He never smiled, but once she caught him watching the mountains with a look that wasn't quite sorrow, wasn't quite peace. Matthew, the ranch hand, watched her too, though not unkindly. He was a man of few words, but she could feel the tension in him when Elias wasn't near. As if he wasn't sure what she was yet, a helper or a storm. One morning, a coyote's howl split the air. Clara bolted upright in bed, her heart thundering. For a moment, she was back in Dry Creek, back in that alley where the sheriff had watched as 3 men held her down. She stumbled outside, breathing hard, the stars sharp above her. Elias stood by the barn, rifle in hand, his eyes already on her. "You're safe here," he said quietly. She didn't answer, just stared at the dark tree line. He walked over, not too close, and handed her a mug of hot coffee. They stood like that until the night faded into gray dawn. Later that week, she found herself in the old smokehouse, scrubbing the stone floor when Matthew appeared in the doorway. "You ain't just passing through," he said, more statement than question. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't have anywhere to pass through to." Matthew shifted, arms crossed. "Elias don't bring folks here. Not ever. You know why." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. "'Cause he lost everything. Wife. Son. Years ago. Wagon ambush. He buried them up on the north ridge." Clara lowered her eyes. The stone beneath her knees seemed to pulse with old sorrow. Matthew's voice softened. "He ain't the type to invite ghosts in. So if you're here, it means something." She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what it meant either. Only that every day she didn't want to leave. That evening, a storm rolled over the valley. The air turned heavy, pressing against skin like unseen hands. Lightning forked across the sky. Clara stood beneath the eaves watching it. The wind ripped at the trees. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt something inside her move. Not fear. Not grief. But the distant tremor of something alive. The next morning, a rider appeared. He wore a town deputy's badge, but the sneer on his face had nothing to do with law. "Looking for a woman," he said. "Name's Clara Holden. Heard she's hid. Ain't ye out here?" Elias stood in the yard, arms crossed. Behind him, Clara froze in the doorway. "She ain't hiding," Elias said, voice flat as stone. "She lives here now." The man's smile faded. "She's wanted for questioning. Folks in Dry Creek say she's got debt. Say she caused some trouble. Those folks lied. You interfering with law, Boone?" Elias stepped forward, slow. "No. Just telling you to get off my land." The man hesitated. looked past Elias to where Clara stood in the doorway, eyes hard, chin lifted. "You think she's worth the trouble?" he spat. Elias didn't answer with words. He reached for the rifle leaning by the fence post and cocked it once. The deputy backed off, spitting in the dirt. "You'll regret this, Boone." Already regretted not doing it sooner. The man rode off. Clara stayed by the door, her breath shaky. Elias turned to her. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. But she did. That night, by the fire, she told him everything. How her husband died from a mining accident 2 years after the war. How the fever took her boy. How the town turned on her. How the sheriff offered her protection in exchange for silence about what his men had done. How she refused. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't ask for any of it. I just didn't know how to stop surviving." He looked at her then, not with pity, but recognition. "I buried my son beside his mother during the first frost of winter," he said. "Didn't think I'd survive that season either. But the ranch needed tending. And grief don't care if the fence is down." Clara nodded slowly. That was the first time she cried, not because of pain, but because someone had finally seen it. Days passed. Then weeks. The world outside the valley kept turning, but inside, something had shifted. They moved in rhythm now, he with the herds, she with the house and fields. Occasionally, their hands would brush, or their eyes would meet across the barn. It was never spoken aloud. But then came the fire. The western field lit up one night like hell itself had opened. Flames devoured dry grass with terrifying speed. Smoke curled into the stars. Clara was the first to see it. She screamed his name and ran toward the horses. Elias was already there, tossing buckets, shouting orders. Matthew drove the cattle east while Elias and Clara battled the blaze side by side. When her sleeve caught fire, he dropped his shovel and tackled her to the ground, smothering the flame with his own coat. They lay in the dirt, coughing, shaking, her face pressed to his chest. Afterward, after the flames had died and the field was black and quiet, he looked at her with an urgency that wasn't desperation, but choice. "You can leave tomorrow if you want," he said hoarsely. "I don't want to. You don't owe me anything. I'm not staying because I owe you." She paused, eyes shining in the moonlight. "I'm staying because for the first time, I'm not afraid to be known." His breath hitched. And in that stillness, amid the ashes of what could have destroyed them, Elias Boone reached out, not to save, not to shelter, but simply to hold. As morning broke over the charred field, new green shoots already peeked through the black. Life finding its way. ChatGPT said. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the valley in silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your ribs and made you breathe slower, as if the world had settled into prayer. Smoke curled from the chimney of Elias Boone's ranch, winding toward a pewter sky. Inside, Clara stood at the window, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. She watched him saddle the chestnut mare, his movements deliberate, precise. Since the fire, he had changed, just a little. He stood straighter, spoke softer, looked her in the eye more often. Not a man reborn, but a man rediscovered. Clara stepped out onto the porch, wrapping Elias's old coat around her shoulders. "Where you headed?" she asked, her voice calm but not casual. He tightened the strap and didn't look up. "North Ridge. Tree fell across the fence last night. I'll be back before sundown." "I'll pack something," she said automatically. He paused, looked at her. Really looked. "Thank you." It was a simple exchange, but it held a tenderness that words could only bruise. She went inside, wrapped bread and cheese in cloth, slipped it into the saddlebag herself. Then, without thinking, her fingers brushed his as she handed it over. The way he held her gaze afterward lingered longer than the touch. When he rode off, Clara stayed by the fence, watching until the snow swallowed his shape whole. By noon, the wind had picked up. The sky darkened with low clouds, and birds flew lower than usual, uneasy. Clara chopped wood beside the barn, her movements rhythmic, measured, controlled. Then, a distant rumble. Not thunder, hooves. She looked up. 4 riders emerged from the tree line, their silhouettes sharp against the snow. Men from Dry Creek. She recognized 2 of them, Marshall Denton and the saloon owner, Mark Rowe. Both had leered at her once. Now they wore smirks like knives. Clara didn't run. She set the axe down carefully and stood her ground. Well, if it ain't the widow Holden, Denton drawled as he dismounted, the snow crunching beneath his boots. Heard you found yourself a new man. She didn't answer. Rowe chuckled. We figured Boone was just being neighborly. Didn't think he'd go as far as shacking up with damaged goods. Clara's jaw clenched. You should leave. Denton tilted his head. Funny. That's not how law works. See, you never settled those debts back in town. And you skipped a court appearance. That makes you fugitive material. I didn't receive any summons. And I don't owe anything that wasn't fabricated. He stepped closer, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. That's not how the papers see it. Behind him, Rowe and the others spread out, scanning the property like vultures waiting for death. You're trespassing, Clara said. Elias will be back soon. Denton grinned. That's the idea. Clara moved fast. She turned, bolted for the house, but Rowe grabbed her by the arm before she could reach the door. Get off me, she shouted, struggling. He backhanded her, sending her to the ground. Blood touched her lip. You listen good, Denton said, crouching beside her. Boone's reputation don't scare me. He's a man living with ghosts. And ghosts don't bleed. She didn't respond. Just stared at him with a fury so bright it chilled the air. He stood and motioned to the others. Search the house. Find papers, valuables, anything that proves she's hiding here under false pretenses. Rowe dragged her to her feet. She didn't fight. Not yet. Inside, drawers slammed open. Furniture overturned. Boots stomped on polished floors and cracked family heirlooms that didn't belong to her, but she felt every break like it was her own bones. Denton poured himself a whiskey from the cabinet and sat in Elias's chair, leaning back like he owned the place. You should have stayed in town, he said. Would have been easier. The front door swung open so violently it cracked the frame. Elias Boone stood there, snow melting in his beard, eyes like twin furnaces. Nobody moved. Rowe turned, startled, but Elias already had his rifle leveled. Let her go, he said. Denton smirked, unfazed. Boone. You're harboring a fugitive. You know what that means. I know it means get off my land before I put a bullet in your leg. I've got the badge. And I've got the jurisdiction of my own fence line. Clara stepped away from Rowe, blood still on her chin. Denton stood, slow, deliberate. This woman's a liar and a thief. You think she's worth going to war over? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he cocked the rifle and aimed it directly at Denton's thigh. The marshal hesitated. You'll hang for this, he said. I've hung for worse things in my mind, Elias replied. Now ride. Denton spat on the floor and nodded to the others. One by one, they filed out, Rowe shooting Clara a venomous glare on his way. When the last hoofbeat faded into the snow, Elias finally lowered the rifle. He looked at Clara. Are you hurt? She shook her head. Not bad. You're bleeding. It's not deep. He moved closer, his hand hesitating before brushing her cheek. I told you you're safe here. She laughed softly, a bitter edge to it. Safe isn't a place, Elias. It's a person. Their eyes met, and something old inside them, something heavy and hidden, fell away like frost beneath sunlight. Later that evening, with the house repaired as best as it could be, Elias stood in front of the fire, his posture tighter than usual. I've seen war, Clara, he said. Seen men bury their humanity for pride, for vengeance. I thought I buried mine with my family. But I was wrong. She didn't interrupt. I don't have much left. Just this land, these hands, and whatever courage I have left to offer. He turned to her, voice barely above a whisper. But if you want it, if you'll have me, I'd stand beside you, Not just here, but wherever you need me to be." Clara was silent for a long time. Then she stepped forward, her hand finding his. "I never asked to be saved," she said. "But you never tried to save me. You just let me be strong again." Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, the fire glowed brighter. They married at the end of winter, when the ice thawed and the first flowers fought their way through the soil. No preacher. No guest. Just the wind, the mountains, and two souls who had stopped pretending they didn't need each other. Matthew stood as witness, his eyes misty though he'd never admit it. Elias took her hand and placed a simple silver ring there, nothing grand, nothing polished. But strong. Like everything worth building. Weeks passed, and spring painted the valley green again. The orchard began to bloom. The horses galloped freely. And Clara, now boon in name and truth, walked among the wildflowers with a softness to her step that hadn't been there before. But peace doesn't come without shadow. One evening, a letter arrived. A judge from Dry Creek. Charges dropped. No explanation. No apology. Elias crumpled the paper and tossed it into the fire. Clara watched it burn. "Are you angry?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. Just tired of ghosts." "You've outlived them." "Maybe. Or maybe I've just finally stopped running." They sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed into the hills. "I used to believe life was about endurance," she said. "Just surviving from one day to the next. And now I think it's about choosing what to love enough to endure for." He reached for her hand. And in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. Their story wasn't perfect. It had been written in bruises, in fire, in silence, and blood. Thunder rolled over the valley like distant cannons, and the wind turned violent, sweeping across the plains with an unforgiving hand. Elias stood at the barn doors, squinting into the haze. Somewhere out in the pasture, two mares were still unaccounted for, spooked by the first clap of thunder and driven toward the hills. He couldn't afford to wait. Not with a lightning sky and rising waters threatening every low path on the property. Clara found him cinching the saddle on the old Appaloosa. Her face, pale in the half-light, showed no panic, only concern. "You're not going out there alone." He didn't look up. "They'll break a leg if they get trapped near the gulch. Then we'll go together." A second later, she was grabbing her coat. He wanted to protest, but he knew better. She wasn't a woman who stood behind fences anymore. She rode out beside him, wind biting their cheeks, hooves pounding into the soaked earth as flashes of white split the sky. By the time they reached the ridge, rain was falling in sheets. Visibility was near nothing. The horses were nowhere in sight, and the trails had turned to treacherous veins of mud and stone. Elias pointed toward the narrow path near Old Bear's Bluff, where runoff often pooled dangerously but led straight to the watering spring. Clara nodded and split off. As she rode, the wind roared through the pines like angry voices. But through the chaos, she heard something else. A whinny. High-pitched. Panicked. She pushed the mare faster, skirting puddles the size of small ponds until she rounded a bend, and there they were. Both mares stood near the edge of the ravine, pacing nervously. One of them had a limp. The rain had muddied the incline behind them, making the return treacherous. Clara dismounted slowly, whispering soft nothings over the storm. The injured mare snorted but didn't bolt. She approached carefully, rope in hand, and with patience and calm, two things she'd earned the hard way, looped it gently around the neck. The return was slow. Dangerous. Twice, her boots slipped in the muck, and her heart nearly burst as the injured mare stumbled behind her. But they made it down the ridge, just as Elias reappeared from the trees with the second mare roped and breathing hard. He caught sight of Clara, soaked and mud-slick, guiding both animals, and something inside him cracked open, pride, admiration, awe. He didn't say anything, just took the rope from her hands and nodded. Back at the ranch, after drying off and stabling the horses, they sat together near the fire, wrapped in quilt. The house groaned in the wind, but inside it was warm and silent. Clara leaned back in the chair, watching the flames flicker. Do you remember the first night I arrived? She asked. Elias nodded. You barely said a word. I thought I was going to die on that porch. You almost did. She looked over, her eyes steady. But you didn't let me. I didn't do much. You did everything. There was a long pause. Then, Elias reached behind his chair and pulled out a folded letter. He handed it to her without speaking. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, crisp. The seal bore the insignia of a law office from back east. As she read, her hands trembled. You found them? She whispered. I hired someone months ago. Private man out of St. Louis. Took some time, but he did it. Clara's breath hitched. My son's alive? Elias nodded. They changed his name. Adopted by a preacher's family. He's 16 now. Lives in Kansas. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. The weight of years, of doubt, guilt, helplessness, pressed down until all she could do was cry. Elias didn't say anything. He just took her hand and held it like an anchor. Later, once she dried her face and the letter lay on the table between them, Clara spoke again. What do I do now? Elias looked into the fire. That depends. Do you want to see him? Yes. But I'm afraid. Of what? That he won't remember me. That he'll hate me. That I'll ruin whatever life he's built. He turned to her. You don't have to decide now. But if you go, I'll go with you. The silence that followed was heavy, but not dark. It was the weight of choice, of love offered freely. The weeks that followed passed in a haze of quiet preparations. Clara wrote a letter to the family, nothing demanding, only a gentle explanation and a hope for contact. She mailed it with shaking hands and then waited. Spring turned to summer. Every morning she checked the mailbox. Every evening she came home with empty hands. But Elias never let hope die in his voice. Then, one late August afternoon, the reply came. Clara sat on the porch, hands trembling as she unfolded the letter. Elias sat beside her, waiting. The handwriting was neat, the tone respectful. Her son, his name was Jacob now, had read her letter. He wanted to meet. The family was cautious, but willing. They invited her to Kansas. Quietly. No drama. Just an honest beginning. Clara folded the letter and placed it in her lap. Her eyes brimmed again, but she smiled through it. I want to go, she said softly. Elias reached for her hand. We leave at first light. The journey took 3 days. Across wide plains and dusty roads, through towns where strangers stared and whispered. But Clara stood tall, wearing her past like a badge instead of a bruise. Elias stayed close, never overbearing, always just enough. When they arrived at the small white farmhouse, Clara's knees nearly gave out. A woman answered the door, kind-eyed and wary. She introduced herself as Helen, Jacob's adoptive mother. A man stood behind her, protective but not unkind. And then, from the back of the room, a boy stepped forward. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair like Clara's. His eyes, those were hers too. He stared at her for a long time. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Then he said, You wrote me. Yes, she whispered. I read it twice. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I should. Silence. Then, slowly, Jacob stepped forward. You said you loved me. That you always did. I did. I still do. He looked at her with something like wonder. Then, without warning, he embraced her. Strong. Long. Like something sacred had returned. Behind them, Elias watched from the step. Quiet. Smiling. They stayed for 2 days. Nothing rushed. They spoke of memories, of the lost years, of hopes for the ones ahead. Helen and her husband were cautious, but not cruel. They asked questions, listened, offered grace. When it was time to leave, Jacob walked them to the edge of the property. Clara turned, hesitant. May I write you? He nodded. You can do more than that. You can visit. Often. She hugged him again, this time laughing through the tears. As they rode away, Elias glanced at her. You all right? Clara nodded. More than all right. Back home, the ranch felt different. Not smaller. Not lonelier. Just lighter. Elias stood by the fence one morning, watching the sunrise spill gold over the hills. Clara joined him, coffee in hand. I never thought I'd have peace, she said. Not really. You earned it. I didn't think that mattered. He turned, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. It matters. What you survive matters. What you become after matters more. She smiled. And you? He shrugged. I'm just a man who built a fence and found a reason to open the gate. Their laughter echoed across the fields, carried by the breeze like music. The valley remained wild, unpredictable, and free.